My name is Sean, and for 3 years, I worked as a head waiter at one of the most upscale restaurants in the city bistro Horizon. To the outside world, it was a paradise of fine dining, soft jazz, pristine white tablecloths, $100 Wagyu steaks, and a clientele that tipped in crisp $100 bills. But behind the kitchen doors, it was a psychological thriller. And the monster at the center of it was our general manager. Marcus. Marcus looked like a textbook luxury manager. Tailored suits, a Rolex that he flashed constantly, and an incredibly fake, charismatic smile that he used on corporate owners and rich guests. But to the staff, he was a tyrant. The restaurant industry is brutal, but Bistro Horizon was worse because Marcus had turned modern employee exploitation into a fine art. He used 2 main weapons to bleed us dry: the phantom till and the mandatory tip pool. Let me explain. In a high-end restaurant, servers can make serious money from tips. On a Good Friday night, I could easily bring in $400 in cash and credit card gratuities. But under Marcus's rules, all tips had to be pooled and submitted to the back office at the end of the shift. Marcus claimed the system calculated a fair share for the kitchen staff, the bussers, and the hosts. But by month 2, I noticed the math wasn't mathing. I'm not just a waiter. I actually have an associate degree in forensic accounting. I took the restaurant job because I needed quick cash to pay off a family medical debt. But my brain always functioned in spreadsheets. When my monthly paycheck arrived, my pooled tip payout looked incredibly thin. When I asked the other servers, Chloe, an old-timer who was working to support her kid, and David, a college student, they all reported the same thing. Marcus says it was a slow month for the restaurant, Sean, Chloe told me, her eyes tired. He said, if we don't like the payout, there are 50 people waiting in line for our jobs. But it wasn't a slow month. The dining room was packed. Every night. Then came the second weapon, the inventory shortages. Every 2 weeks, Marcus would call a mandatory staff meeting. He would slam a clipboard on the table and scream about missing expensive wine, broken plates, or stolen steaks. Someone is stealing from me, Marcus would roar, his face turning red. And until the thief confesses, the entire shortage is being deducted from your base hourly pay. It was completely illegal, but we were trapped. Most of the staff were young, immigrants, or people living paycheck to paycheck. They didn't know labor laws. They just knew they needed to pay rent. I stayed quiet. I nodded, but my accounting brain went to work. I began to watch Marcus. I watched how he logged into the POS, point of sale system, at the end of the night after the corporate accountant left. I watched how he personally handled the cash drops. And I started to realize that the only person stealing from Bistro Horizon was the man wearing the Rolex. The turning point happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. A regular guest, a wealthy tech investor named Mr. Sterling, came in with a party of 12. They spent over $3,500 on dinner and vintage Bordeaux. At the end of the night, Mr. Sterling called me over. He handed me his black Amex card and said, Sean, the service was immaculate. I'm leaving a 30% tip on the card, but here is an extra $300 in cash, just for you and the kitchen line. Split it tonight. I thanked him profusely. Following protocol, I put the cash in the manager's Dropbox and processed the credit card tip. 2 weeks later, I got my pay stub. My tip share for that period was lower than usual. I checked the system log. Mr. Sterling's 30% credit card tip, which amounted to over $1,000, was completely missing from the staff pool allocation. It had been manually adjusted down to 10% in the system. Marcus had edited the transaction after the restaurant closed. I felt a cold rage in my chest. He wasn't just skimming. He was erasing our hard work with a few clicks of a mouse. That night, I made a choice. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to destroy him. But to destroy a man like Marcus, you don't use your fists. You use paper. I began my double life. Every single night, before leaving the restaurant, I took photos of the daily sales summaries, the printed Z reports from the registers, and the shift schedules. I kept my own secret ledger on an encrypted Google Drive. Whenever Marcus announced a shortage deduction, I would secretly photograph the inventory logs. I quickly discovered that the missing cases of Opus 1 wine were actually being loaded into the trunk of Marcus's Mercedes late at night. He was stealing corporate inventory, blaming the waitstaff, making us pay for it out of our checks, and then selling the wine privately or drinking it himself. For 2 long years, I collected everything I had. Over 700 pages of daily logs, timesheets showing people working overtime without pay, altered credit card transactions, and cash logs that didn't match the bank deposit receipts. My coworkers thought I was just a quiet, submissive waiter who took Marcus's abuse. Marcus thought I was stupid. He frequently insulted me in front of guests, blaming me for slow service when the kitchen was backed up. "Sean is a bit slow today, folks," Marcus would chuckle to a table, enjoying the power trip. "We keep him around for charity." I just smiled, cleared the plates, and thought about the folder growing on my hard drive. The trap was ready, but I needed the right moment to spring it. That moment came when Chloe, the single mother, came out of Marcus's office in tears. Marcus had deducted $250 from her paycheck because of a missing premium seafood delivery. That $250 was her utility bill money for the winter. When she begged him to reconsider, telling him her heat might get turned off, Marcus looked at her coldly and said, "Maybe you should serve your tables faster instead of crying. Get out of my office." That was the final straw. I went into the office 10 minutes later. "Marcus," I said calmly, "I need to talk to you about Chloe paycheck. The seafood delivery wasn't missing. It was rejected by the kitchen chef because it arrived warm, and the distributor took it back. Here is the return slip." I placed the carbon copy on his desk. I had pulled it from the kitchen trash earlier. Marcus's face darkened. He didn't like being caught, and he definitely didn't like a waiter challenging his authority. He stood up, towering over me. "Are you calling me a liar, Sean?" "I am saying the math is wrong, Marcus. And it has been wrong for 2 years." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you are smart because you took some night classes? You are a plate carrier. You are nothing. You want to defend Chloe? Great. You are fired. Effective immediately. Pack your stuff and get out of my restaurant. And don't expect a reference. Can I have my final paycheck and my tip share for this week?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat. You will get what I decide to give you. Now get out before I call security." I didn't yell. I didn't smash anything. I simply nodded, walked to the break room, took my coat, and walked out into the cold night air. As I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the glowing sign of Bistro Horizon, a massive wave of relief washed over me. The parasite thought he had won. He had no idea he had just unlocked the cage. The next morning, I didn't sleep in. I woke up at 7 a.m., made a large pot of black coffee, and opened my laptop. It was time to introduce Marcus to the real world. In the United States, there are two entities you never, ever want to mess with: the Department of Labor and the Internal Revenue Service. I spent 3 days formatting my data into 2 massive, professional-grade forensic audit reports. The first report went to the Department of Labor. It detailed the systemic wage theft, the illegal tip pooling, the uncompensated overtime, and the fraudulent deductions for inventory shortages over a 24-month period. I included the names and contact information of 34 current and former employees who had been victimized. The second report, much larger and more dangerous, went to the IRS. You see, Marcus Greed had a fatal flaw. When he altered the credit card tips in the system and pocketed the cash, that money didn't just vanish. It went into his pocket. And because it was illegal money, he obviously wasn't declaring it on his personal tax returns. Furthermore, by deducting shortages from our pay and not reporting those adjustments correctly to corporate, the restaurant corporate tax filings were completely fraudulent. I filed I-Dan R Dan S Dan Form Laun by Ishiyi, the Whistleblower Informant Award. Application. This is a specific program where the IRS pays citizens a bounty if they provide concrete, non-public evidence of major tax evasion. If the IRS recovers the stolen money, the informant receives between 15 and 30% of the total collected taxes and penalties. I hit submit, printed out physical copies, mailed them via certified mail, and then I waited. For 4 months, nothing happened. I found a new job at a quiet bookstore, making less money but sleeping peacefully at night. I almost thought my reports had been buried under a mountain of government bureaucracy. But federal agencies move like glaciers, slowly but with crushing force. In April, the storm hit Bistro Horizon. I wasn't there to see it, but David, the college student who still worked there, called me from the restaurant bathroom, his voice shaking with excitement. "Sean, you won't believe this," David whispered furiously into the phone. "There are 4 federal agents in suits in Marcus' office right now. They showed up with an unannounced audit warrant. They have locked down the POS system. They are copying the hard drives. And Marcus looks like he is about to faint. They told him nobody leaves the building. The Department of Labor and the IRS had launched a joint task force investigation. My reports were so precise, complete with exact dates, transaction numbers, and system timestamps, that the auditors didn't have to look for the evidence. I had handed them the exact map to the treasure. Over the next 6 months, the empire of cards collapsed completely. The audit revealed that over 2 years, Marcus had stolen over $180,000 in tips from the staff. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Once the IRS forensic accountants started digging into the restaurant books, they found out that Marcus had been running a massive corporate embezzlement scheme. He had created fake vendor accounts, billing the restaurant owners for food and supplies that were never delivered, and funneling the cash into his personal bank accounts. The total amount of tax evasion and embezzlement exceeded $2.4 million. The corporate owners of the restaurant chain tried to fight it, but the evidence was undeniable. The penalties and back taxes levied by the IRS were so severe that the corporate entity faced immediate insolvency. Bistro Horizon filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy and closed its doors forever 2 weeks later. But the federal government wasn't done with Marcus, because the fraud was deliberate, systematic, and involved mail and wire fraud, altering electronic bank transactions. It crossed from a civil matter into criminal prosecution. Marcus was arrested at his suburban home. To pay off the massive federal tax liens and penalties, the Government Asset Forfeiture Unit moved in. His shiny Mercedes? Confiscated. His luxury home? Foreclosed and auctioned off. His precious Rolex? Seized as a proceeds of crime asset. His wife reportedly divorced him within a month of the asset seizure. Marcus went from a high-flying, arrogant luxury manager to a bankrupt felon facing 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. A year after I filed the paperwork, I received a thick manila envelope from the Department of Labor. The government had successfully recovered a portion of the stolen wages from the liquidation of the restaurant assets. Inside was a settlement breakdown. Every single waiter, busser, and cook who had worked under Marcus received a check for back wages and stolen tips. Chloe received a check for over $14,000. She used it to pay off her debts and put a down payment on a reliable car. David got his college tuition for the next semester completely paid for. They all knew it was me. I received dozens of texts and calls from emotional former coworkers thanking me for changing their lives. But the final twist came 18 months later. In early 2026, I received an official letter from the IRS whistleblower office. The criminal and civil cases against Marcus and the corporate entity had been finalized. The total amount recovered by the government in back taxes, interest, and fraud penalties was $2.1 million. Because my documentation was the direct cause of the recovery, the IRS awarded me a 20% whistleblower bounty after taxes. A check for over $400,000 was deposited into my bank account. I didn't use the money to buy a Rolex or a fancy sports car. I paid off the remainder of my family's medical debt, put a massive down payment on a quiet property with a beautiful garden, and invested the rest. Sometimes, when I am sitting on my porch, enjoying the quiet evening, I think about Marcus in his gray prison jumpsuit, eating cafeteria food, and remembering the time he told me I was just a plate carrier who was nothing. He was wrong. I wasn't nothing. I was the accountant who kept the receipts.